Hello everyone, welcome to the Logical Fallacy. My name is Sean and welcome to another special video, and we're about to get into probably one of Matpat's most anticipated videos ever, honestly. It's another FNAF video, but it's not just any FNAF. He just released, a while ago, he released a video basically telling us that everything that we thought we knew about FNAF was apparently wrong. But he also made us a promise that he was going to make it right and he was going to redo the FNAF timeline. This is the first of 3 videos that he'll be releasing each week, as far as I'm aware. So we just got the first one, so let's jump into it. I'm a bit nervous, but I really love this franchise, so I'm excited to kind of get all of your guys' thoughts. And also see what Matpat thinks about
Today
this.
we end the torment. 19 books, 11 games, 8 whole years, all leading to this moment. The ultimate FNAF timeline is finally complete. The pieces are in place for us. Now all we have to do is put this story of tragedy, jealousy, and loss back together.
Just like we're gonna put you back together
Welcome
again.
to Game Theory, the show that feels like a kid revealing the class project that he's been working on all year. Except here, it's the class project that I've been working on for the past decade of my life. This one is big, my friends, and I gotta admit, kind of nervous. I haven't attempted a timeline video on this franchise since 2018. Back in the days when Mike was the crying child, Afton coming back was actually a surprise, and Fazgoo wasn't a phrase I'd ever thought I'd have to utter. But since the last time I did something like this, we've had 3 more massive games, the death and revival of the FNAF movie, and more robot kids than you can shake a staff bot at. It is exhausting trying to keep track of this whole franchise, which honestly is why I'm here today. The lore at this point is complicated. It is full of speculation and theories, so to hopefully make it a little easier for everyone and to give us all a baseline to talk about this franchise moving forward into the future, it's time to reveal my current working FNAF timeline. But just before I do, I just want to explain a couple of things. First, this timeline is massive. Seriously, it is huge. This thing towers over any video project we have ever done on the channel. But when you look at the totality of this franchise, the story of FNAF really boils down to the story of one man, William Afton. His successes, his failures, his rise to becoming co-owner of one of the most successful restaurant franchises in the world, and his eventual fall to the monsters he helped to create, only to then be reborn in a new digital form later. That's why I've decided to split this timeline into 3 main chunks. The foundation of Freddy's, how the business started and how it came into being, the Afton era, William's decades-long murder spree, and post-Purple Guy. Basically modern FNAF, everything that happens after the pizzeria simulator fire. And because there are lots of new big revelations in this thing that seemingly come out of nowhere, as well as just points I want to talk about further, I decided to dedicate 1 episode to each chunk. I originally wanted it to be one seamless continuous video, but it just felt incomplete without some sort of explanation at the end of each one. Once this whole thing's done, I promise I'm going to merge all the narrative bits into one massive video so you can just skip my explanations. But for now, this just felt like the best, most satisfying, most complete way to do this. That being said, this is still about the story, the broad strokes of the franchise. So in order to make sure that you guys know that I'm not just pulling answers out of thin air, not only am I discussing some of the more controversial bits at the end of each chunk, we're also putting in a handy little graphic in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, which will show thumbnails, video titles, books, and any other citations that we need throughout the video. So if you wish to understand that specific statement in more detail, you know exactly where we've taken it from. That way you can look into those details for yourself. So sit back, grab some popcorn, or your pitchforks if you're the type to get upset when I say something controversial, and make sure that you subscribe, since this is going to be a video that you're going to want to come back to a few times in order to fully dissect. Without any more waiting, I present to you the story of a loving, obsessive father who slowly descended into madness, and along the way discovered the secret to eternal life.
Foundations of Freddy.
Our story begins not in the 1980s, or even in the 1970s, but all the way back in the 1930s. It was the throes of the Great Depression, and people were in desperate need of cheap entertainment, especially in Utah, one of the states hit hardest, 4th highest unemployment in the nation, and full of transients. People looking for work in Salt Lake, finding none, and ultimately moving on to find their fortunes out in California. People were tired and they were hungry, but as they traveled, there was one thing that could lift their spirits. A simple roadside attraction called Fredbear's Singin' Show. The ads were plastered all over town, featuring
Really?
an animated bear drawn in the popular pie-eyed cartoon style for characters at the time. He resembled cartoons like Mickey Mouse, Felix the Cat, Betty Boop. It immediately said that this, Fredbear's, was a place where you could bring the family.
Or like the
and the
70s,
price,
right?
honestly, couldn't be beat. For 50 cents, you could get food and entertainment as you watched the local trained real-life dancing bear perform on stage. Normally, you only got to see dancing bears at large traveling circuses like Barnum and Bailey, where the tickets would go for about $1. That's $1 without food. But this was a smaller show, like the type from the Von Brothers or the Robbins Brothers, where tickets would sell for just a mere 50 cents. Watching that bear do tricks on stage brought a glimmer of joy at a time when so much was wrong with the world. The simple show would go on for years, bringing happiness to hundreds of travelers passing through looking for a quick meal. But it left a permanent impression on one little boy, capturing his imagination in a way that nothing else had. One little boy named Billy. That was his nickname at least, but his parents liked to call him William Afton. The bear could dance, could sing. For decades, William dreamed of recreating that moment of bringing a musical bear to life, but how? William was smart, without a doubt, and he had a keen mind for business, but he wasn't the most creative. How do you...
Does that mean whenever he was in his... I always thought that he was young whenever he started Fazbear Entertainment. Like, I thought he was like a young entrepreneur, like in his 20s or like his 30s. But this is kind of framing it that he was more in like his 50s or 40s when he started it, which is rather interesting. It seems like that Springtrap may not have been so spry as we thought. Interesting. Was there a date on that ticket, or is that more historically accurate to kind of like him matching up to the era?
Make a singing, dancing bear come to life. The best he could do was using rudimentary costumes. William was inspired by the work of Walt Disney, who throughout the 50s and 60s was pioneering the use of mascot suits throughout his theme park. The big innovation? Suits with 5 fingers. This allowed the performers wearing the suits to use their natural arms and hands to interact with the guests, as opposed to the older models where the arms would just hang limply by their sides. Finally, with a simple mascot suit, he would be able to realize his childhood dream. He would be able to bring Fredbear to life. To appeal to the kids, and for copyright reasons, he changed Fredbear from a realistic brown animal to a cartoonish yellow bear with a purple hat and bow tie.
It's yellow.
But feeling like one character wasn't enough, he added another friend, a yellow rabbit with a purple vest and matching tie named Bonnie the Bunny. While Fredbear was certainly his first love, Bonnie was extra special because that was his. It was an original character that he had created from scratch. And I do mean scratch. William's hand-sewn costumes were rough with seams and stitches visibly showing, but it was the best that he could do. And you know what? It was just enough. Bonnie and Fredbear would perform on stage to small but enthusiastic crowds. Finally, he was able to deliver fantasy and fun to all the kids, delighting and inspiring them in the exact way that he had been delighted and inspired so many years ago. And things could have ended there. That could have been the end to his story. It could have been perfect had it not.
Okay, Matpat, let me follow you here. So basically what you're saying is you're looking at a ticket stub, you're getting the style of it, and you're looking at that and you're saying, oh, this happened in the 1930s. Which is fine, I'm guessing, like, okay. But that was an advertisement for, like, this, I'm guessing, because that was, like, actual Freddy Fazbear. I'm confused. I am really confused right now.
For one thing. Other people saw the success of his idea and they wanted in. Enter Chica's Party World, a rival restaurant starring performing animal characters. His idea, except they did it better. William may have been the first, but obviously he wasn't the best. It hurt the prideful William Afton to admit it, but this restaurant was able to do the thing that he always wanted to do: make the animals actually come to life. All of the performers in this restaurant were robots, simple metal skeletons that were powered by battery packs, but all of them able to freely turn and talk and dance on their own, no human required. It was like magic that came from the mind of a brilliant creator named Henry Emily. This Henry, in some small way, had been able to harness the power of life itself. Afton admired him. He was jealous, to be sure, but he also looked upon this man with awe. Off to one side of Chica's Party World was a small cabaret stage featuring an elephant magician. On the other, a hippo known to ramble on and on. That one was more of a joke for the parents, but it was the main stage that was for the kids. A rocking band of characters featuring a yellow chicken thing with a southern drawl named Chica, backed by a band of other country-themed characters, including a pig with a banjo, an upbeat frog from the local swimming hole, and a brown bear with a heavy southern accent. Wait, a bear? But bears were his animals. Why not a cow or a horse? Something to fit the country theme a bit better. Why'd it have to be a bear? And adding insult to injury, they had the nerve to call this thing Ned Bear, a direct copy of his own Fredbear.
Whoops, that's gonna leave a mark.
No, that was not okay. Afton's jealous admiration turned to hardened bitterness. A bitterness that would only grow over the next couple of years as families continued to choose
like this
Chica's
is gonna be
party
my
world
expression
over
throughout this
Fredbear.
video,
William just
but
couldn't compete with.
We gotta stop for a second. Okay. What are we watching? I'm Matpat. I'm trying to follow. I mean, it's making sense, I guess, but I mean, this is all new information, and it's hard because I think he has so much information to go through. He's not able to really support it very well. And just because there's the books are happening, like, including the fact that the Silver Eyes and the other things are happening in presumably a sort of alternate reality. But also the books also might be that as well. However, he's taking, like, his rule for himself is, and he said this before, is he'll take the concepts. Like, the concepts from the book are canon. Like, the concepts, those are things that could happen. But he's not supported any of this. I'm really confused because, quite frankly, I'm just, like, looking at the timeline. I'm just
with the appeal of the robots. Eventually, his restaurant would go bankrupt,
it just might
only
be
to get
the
bailed
fact
out
that
by,
a lot of these points of lore have been repeated so often that
another
this is just something
humiliation
completely
that
different.
William wouldn't soon forget.
Okay.
1979. Despite being bitter, Afton couldn't deny that what came next was a period of massive success and expansion. With the two franchises now merged into one, it was the best of both worlds. Afton's ideas with Henry's robotic expertise. The two men decided to launch under a new name, Fredbear's Family Diner, a pizza chain that would eventually come to feature a mix of humans in performing suits as well as on-stage animatronics. They decided to stick with Fredbear as the headliner, considering the yellow bear was easily identifiable as a brand because he was the original performing animal mascot. Afton appreciated that. This new restaurant would also see a mix of characters as the two franchises merged into one, with Pig Patch and Happy Frog performing right alongside Fredbear and Bonnie. And as part of this one big Fredbear family, they even got themselves official merch that were released, ranging from masks to magnets.
The crappy Mr. Hippo fridge magnet?
I am sorry, Gregory.
That said, not all the characters were winners. The reception to some characters was just mediocre, so they faded away into the dumpster, storage units, and retro budget tech stores of lost nostalgia, waiting for their chance to step back into the limelight if and when a headliner went out of commission. Others, though, would fare much better, like a new Pirate Fox, as well as a blue guitar-playing variant of the yellow Bonnie Bunny. Ultimately, the franchise would get so big, it would spawn its own cartoon show, Fredbear and Friends. Business was booming. In the end, Fredbear and Bonnie's popularity would be so strong that they would be able to support the Fredbear's Family Diner franchise all on their own, while also spinning off a new sister location dedicated to their friends. In 1983, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza launched, giving a dedicated home to all this new supporting cast of characters. Chica the Chicken, Bonnie the Blue Bunny, Foxy the Pirate, and of course the headliner, a brown Freddy Fazbear. Business was good, and Afton was happy, mostly. It did bother him that the one original character that he created, the one that he himself played, Golden Bonnie, got passed over for inclusion in that cartoon show. The only character in the roster of regulars to get ignored for the show, but other than that, things were going smoothly. He had himself a wife, 2 sons, a daughter, he had a thriving business, and best of all, he was able to learn the craft of robotics from the man that he both loved and hated, Henry. Together, they were constantly pushing the limits of what these characters could do.
That's a bit what I'm confused about, alright? So, Matpat, let me follow your train of thought. What you're trying to tell me is that Henry Emily was the first person to ever make a animatronic that was close to what Afton wanted. And Afton was inspired by that, even though Henry apparently ripped off one of his characters, which we really never have any information that Henry ever owned his own company. We only have information that Henry and Afton were partners. However, in Sister Location, like, we know that William Afton was designing complex animatronics by Sister Location, right? So, like, obviously that's in the next video. He's not going to get to that. There's no evidence to suggest the fact that he learned that from Henry. Like, you can't just learn animatronic engineering by just watching someone, I guess. Like, you could do it hypothetically, but, like, why couldn't it just be that Afton was an engineer who learned this prior and was gifted in that in his own right, and it just doesn't make a whole, like, I'm really confused.
Because it was quick and easy, new characters introduced into the roster would be given a simple hand-sewn suit with 5 fingers that any performer could wear. Eventually, Henry would design one of his signature animatronics for that character, utilizing a divided mouth with either a hinged or sliding jaw design. This was the first generation of animatronics. But why stop there? Afton had big ideas. What if the animatronics weren't just locked to the stage, but could freely roam the restaurant and interact with the kids? What if his mascot suits could become animatronics? What if you could use more than just rigid metallic skeletons? Why not experiment with tubes and wires that would give the animatronics fluidity and flexibility while still providing structure? The possibilities for this technology were endless. Afton fell in love with robotics. He had started with a dream of bringing one simple singing bear to life, but with robots, he had stumbled across the tools that gave him the ability to control life itself. And thanks to Henry, he was practically speedrunning his way to an engineering degree. And while William wouldn't admit it out loud, one other thing that kept pushing him forward was the desire to beat his former rival, to prove himself smarter and more capable, to surpass the man who everyone else considered to be a visionary genius. But pride cometh.
Was this like mentioned in Silver Eyes or like in any of the books? The fact that
before the fall, and tragedy was about
I don't see any notations.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of part 1 of the story.
I'm not hating
that
on
said,
that,
at the end of each of these
just...
chunks, I want to break down some of the logical leaps that I made, since the more narrative format doesn't give me much of a chance to justify a lot of the big decisions. And admittedly, there are some large leaps in here. Let's just start off with Fredbear's Singing Show, shall we? We know, based on the retro poster that was hidden in Security Breach, that at least at one point, Fredbear was an actual bear. And like I called out in that narrative segment, dancing bear shows were a real form.
No, that's, I mean, they don't have to show an animatronic looking bear there. I mean, that's just an animated bear from the show. Fredbear Singing Show. I guess that does. Okay, I can see that. Fredbear's, but that just means he ripped off the name, didn't he? And let's see, is there a copyright for, I mean, like, is there anywhere that says that it's from the 30s?
At least at one point, Fredbear was an actual bear. And like I called out in that narrative segment, dancing bear shows were a real form of entertainment. The only problem
Are you sure it's not an advertisement for just like an animated, like you mentioned, like just like an animated movie isn't an actual bear show? That's a bit confusing.
Timing wise, none of our main characters would be the people in charge of that business in the 30s and a series of pizza restaurants in the 80s without them just being extremely old. Best case scenario, if Afton's running the Singing Show when he's 18, that still puts him at nearly 70 when the first pizzeria opens and his murder spree begins. That just doesn't make a lot of logical sense, because he doesn't become immortal until his first death in Springtrap. That's why I suspect that Fredbear's Singing Show was either a family business that Afton then carried on to a new generation, or something that he saw as a kid and just wanted to recreate when he grew up. The Fredbear Singing Show thing also starts laying the groundwork for some of the core elements of the story, that Freddy's was a place of fantasy and fun, and that Afton, despite eventually falling to become the heartless serial killer and mad scientist that we know him as, began as someone with good intentions and a love of entertaining kids. He wanted to bring things to life from the very beginning, a theme that recurs a lot for him throughout the rest of the franchise. Next up, let's talk about those mascot costumes. One thing that I keep going back to is the design of Glitch Trap. It's a handcrafted suit. You can see the seams and everything. It even has 5 fingers for the performer's hands. It is very much not a Springtrap suit. This is something much more rudimentary. It came at a time before animatronics were a part of the story. That's why I suspect that it was actually the first, predating literally everything. It's also a suit that is very personal to Afton. He put his digital consciousness in that form. It's his personal avatar. It's the way that he sees himself. There's also a whole separate discussion to be had here about the habits and rituals of serial killers. So the fact that he's choosing to lure kids and kill them in this particular suit actually says a lot about his emotional attachment to it. So while Fredbear seems to have started as someone else's creation, Golden Bonnie was uniquely Williams, giving him a personal connection. And that's not all. In this whole franchise, only one set of characters have themselves 5 fingers, the Nightmares. Even Golden Freddy, Fredbear was a 5-fingered wearable suit at one point in the story, as we see in this shot from the graphic novel, before he, like everyone else, was turned into an animatronic. This seems to imply that all of the main characters had similar wearable mascot outfits at least at one point in time, and that whoever is having the FNAF 4 nightmares, if they even are nightmares, something that we'll touch on in part 2, saw those mascot suits specifically. Lastly, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the literal elephant, Orville Elephant, as well as the rest of the mediocre melodies. For a while now, I've suspected that the mediocre melodies played a much more important role in the story than just being a bunch more animatronics to fill out the roster.
About this in the GT Live yesterday,
which is just so suspiciously close to Fredbear. And yet, there are 2 key details that we're gonna have to justify with any mediocre melodies mention. One, they're very rudimentary with external battery packs.
And I'm not sure if he was able to edit this into the video. I'm guessing not, but in the actual guide that came out yesterday, and GT Live went over this, apparently there was actually a mention of this, the fact that they were rip-off animatronics. So this is supported. Whether or not that means that it comes earlier in the timeline, it's a bit interesting. Like, it specifically calls out Nedbear, obviously, but like,
implying that they come very early in the timeline. And 2, we know that at minimum, Mr. Hippo does eventually become an official member of the extended Freddyverse. Yeah. But if these things are supposed to be cheap, generic rip-offs, why would you be trying to rip off yourself? You wouldn't. You would be stealing someone else's ideas. So if Afton created Fredbear, there would have to be some rival franchise. The only other person who would likely be ripping him off? Henry. We've talked extensively about how the mediocre melodies are clearly Henry's design aesthetic, so it just has to be him. I don't think Henry's doing this maliciously. He doesn't strike me as the type. He was likely building the robots at the orders of someone else that was running a rival restaurant franchise. But that's enough motivation to start Afton down a path of jealous rivalry, but also begrudging admiration. As the Freddy Files Ultimate Edition says, it's important to revisit the beginning of Henry and William's relationship, so here you go. I think this is where it begins. Also, this is future Matpat here coming back to add this one in. Seems like the recently released character encyclopedia has backed up all of this speculation. I've had this timeline written for about a month now, but I've also been holding off a bit to see what wrenches this character encyclopedia might throw into it. And on this particular point, I gotta say, it seems like we might actually have nailed it. They actively call out the suspicious similarities to the main Fredbear crew. Quote from one of the pages. Nedbear looks like an imitation, altered just enough to avoid copyright issues. I don't know about you, but that seems to imply that we were right on the money. Knowing all of this at one—
except the fact that that would assume that the suit of Faz, well, I guess aesthetically it doesn't mean that. But what is there to say? Okay, I'm just going
to the franchises had to have merged. That's really the only way that you get Mr. Hippo from the rival franchise as part of the Fazbear crew. This also mirrors a lot of what happened in the real-life history of Chuck E. Cheese, with 2 rival restaurants, each with their own casts of characters, merging to become one unified brand. Again, we've gone into that in detail with other videos, just wanted to remind you all of that here. But why would I call out the rival restaurant as being named Chica's Party World? Few things, actually. First, we know for a fact that a location named Chica's Party World exists. It is mentioned in the source code teasing sister location, so it is out there somewhere and doesn't fit cleanly anywhere. Second, in the story The Puppet Carver, Chica is very explicitly looped in with the book versions of Pig Patch and Nedbear, implying that she started as a mediocre melody. Thirdly, her design just fits better with a theme of down-home country animals with southern accents playing the banjo and eating with bibs. And with her being the headliner of the show with her name on the restaurant, it would make sense then that when the restaurants merged, she was the one that was added to the main cast of characters while all the other mediocres faded away. It's also why when Freddy's closes after William's killing spree, she's the one to branch back off into her old franchise and is therefore missing in sister location, a detail that's bothered me for years at this point. It might also explain why William decided to stuff his first dead kid into Chica. That one was Henry's creation, not his. Is all of this a big leap? Yeah. Is it connecting a lot of dots that are very spread out across the franchise that I've been holding on in the back of my mind for years? Absolutely. But I think it makes sense. It also serves as a clean answer to a lot of the random threads that Scott's been leaving dangling for years. So with all of that in mind, my friends, we can close the book on the foundation of Freddy's. And don't worry, next week I'll be back to give you arguably one of the most confusing parts of this entire timeline situation. Part 2, the Afton era. I promise it will actually be next week this time. No more waiting around. I am just as eager to get this one out the door as you are to watch it. I promise. You know what else I promise? I promise that we'll actually get to talking about the games. I would have liked to have talked about them in this episode, but there just isn't that much of the games that helps us depict anything pre-Family Diner. Although, let's be honest, this franchise has never been just about the games anyway. Even back in the early days of FNAF, we were decoding images and source code that Scott fed us through the website. The modern day books and the clues that we get from those things, now they're just modern extensions of that. All of it is crucial to understanding this franchise and its lore.
Well,
unless, of course, Steel
but...
Wolf finally gets around to making that Fredbear's Family Diner game they want to make so badly.
I've always would love to do is get kind of back to, I have no clue if we'll ever be able to do this, but getting back to kind of like the origin of like Fazbear Entertainment, or the
that'd be cool.
of Freddy Fazbear.
But in the meantime, while we wait for that inevitably cryptic game, I hope that this start to the timeline helps to fill in some of those gaps. I'm excited to share part 2 with you next week. If you haven't subscribed and rang the bell, make sure you do it now so you're notified when that part drops. I cannot wait to see your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, I remind you, it's all just a theory. A game theory. Go easy on me. Tried my best.
Oh yeah, let's go easy on Matpat. Alright, he tried. You know, this was a long video. Like, you know, he did a lot here. Meh. Okay, I'll, you know, just give my thoughts real quick. That was really good. I'll just say it there. Some of the things were a bit confusing for me. I thought that some of the parts were very, very, very big leaps. Personally, I don't think the timeline starts in the 30s. I don't think that really makes too much sense. Look, yes, you do have security breach. You got the advertisements. Let's see if I can find it. But you got the advertisements, right? And he showed the Wikipedia. So during that time, he's basically saying, I don't understand why it can't just be an animation. Like, I don't know why that would... Because the design is so close to what we get in Fazbear and Friends. It feels like there genuinely would be, like, copyright issues there, right? With branding and everything, with like Freddy Fazbear, with the names being so close as well, it feels like maybe like that's just an old retro type advertisements. Like, listen to this. If truly, if this started in the 30s, right? As far as like the singing and dancing bear, it is pretty funny how closely this actually lines up with the totally canon timeline that I reacted to. That was like the parody animation. It's really funny, the fact that Ferdinand is apparently now canon. that is honestly the best thing ever to ever have happened. But no, there was a lot that he talked about here. Love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. For me, it's just, like, I get it. There's a lot of evidence for it. There's also a lot of questions. There's something that just doesn't sit right with me, knowing the fact that, like, oh, you know, Henry Emily taught, just casually taught Afton advanced animatronic engineering. Like, yes, you can teach someone that, but... Like, if he was making them on part, did he really make them by himself? Like, I don't know. It feels more likely that they were partners. Like, we haven't been introduced to every single robotics engineer in the world in the FNAF timeline, right? So, like, I'm sure there's other... This could have been just like a knockoff rival who engineered it and had nothing to do with any of the main characters, and was just like an event that happened that they then went on and bought out, and that's how they kind of are a part now of that. It's pretty interesting though. Thank you guys so much for watching. This was, yeah, I know a lot of people are gonna have a lot of thoughts on this. I'm excited to kind of read everybody's thoughts, but thank you guys so much for joining. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys next time. I think I died a little bit inside, but that's all right.